It was getting better as I got deeper into Iowa. The pie bigger, the ice cream richer. There were the most beautiful bevies of girls everywhere. I looked in Des Moines that afternoon. They were coming home from high school, but I had no time for thoughts like that and promised myself a ball in Denver. Allen Ginsberg was already in Denver. Neil was there. Hal Chase and Ed White were there. It was their hometown. Luann was there. And there was mention of a mighty gang, including Bob Burford, his beautiful blonde sister Beverly, two nurses that Neil knew, the Goulion sisters, and even Alan Temko, my old college writing buddy, was there. Oh, I look forward to all of them with joy and anticipation, so I rush past the pretty girls. And the prettiest girls in the world live in Des Moines, Iowa. A crazy guy with a kind of tool shack on wheels, a truck of tools that he drove standing up like a modern milkman, gave me a ride up the long hill, where I immediately got a ride from a farmer and his son heading out for Adele in Iowa. In this town, under a big elm tree near a gas station, I made the acquaintance of another hitchhiker who was going to be with me a considerable part of the rest of the way. He was, of all things, a typical New Yorker, an Irishman who'd been driving a truck for the post office for most of his work life and was now headed for a girl in Denver and a new life. I think he was running away from something in New York, the law, most likely. He was a real red-nosed young drunk of 30, and he would have bored me ordinarily, except my senses were sharp for any kind of human friendship. He wore a beat sweater, baggy pants, and had nothing with him in the way of a bag. Just a toothbrush, handkerchiefs. He said we ought to hitch together. I should have said no, because he looked pretty awful on the road, but we stuck together and got a ride from a taciturn man to Stuart, Iowa, a town in which I was destined to be really stranded. We stood in front of the railroad ticket shaft in Stuart, waiting for the westbound traffic till the sun went down. A good 5 hours, dawdling away the time at first, telling about ourselves. Then he told dirty stories, then we just ended up kicking pebbles and making goofy noises of one kind and another. We got bored. I decided to spend $1 on beer. We went to a riotous old Buck saloon at Stewart and had a few. Then he got as drunk as he ever did in his 9th Avenue night back home. Yelled joyously in my ear all the sordid dreams of his life. I sort of liked him. Not in that he was a good sort, as he later proved, but he was enthusiastic about things, you know? I mean, we got back on the road in the darkness, and of course nobody stopped and nobody came by much. This went on until 3 o'clock in the morning. We spent some time trying to sleep on the bench at the railroad ticket office, but the telegraph clicked all night and we couldn't sleep, and big freights were slamming around outside. We didn't know how to hop a proper highball. We'd never done it before. Whether they were going east or west, and how to find out what boxcars to pick, and so on. So when the Omaha bus came through just before dawn, we hopped on it and joined the sleeping passengers. For this, I spent most of the last of my few bucks, his fare as well as mine. His name was Eddie. He reminded me of my cousin-in-law from Brooklyn. That was why I stuck with him. It was like having an old friend along, a dumb, smiling, good-natured sort to goof along with. We arrived at Council Bluffs at dawn. I looked out. All winter I'd been reading of the great wagon parties that held council there before hitting the Oregon and Santa Fe trails. And of course now it was only cute suburban cottages, of one damn dumb kind or another, all laid out in the dismal gray dawn. Then Omaha, and by God, the first cowboy I saw. Walking along the bleak walls of the wholesale meat warehouses with a great big 10-gallon hat on and Texas boots, looking like any beat character off the brick-walled dawns of the East except for the getup. We got off the bus and walked clear up the hill, the long hill formed by the mighty Missouri over the millenniums, alongside of which Omaha's built, and got out to the country and stuck our thumbs out. We got a brief ride to a further crossroads from a wealthy rancher with a 10-gallon hat who said the Valley of Nebraska was as great as the Nile Valley of Egypt. And as he said so, I saw the great trees in the distance that snaked with the riverbed and the great verdant fields around it, and almost agreed with him. Then, as we were standing there, and it was starting to get cloudy, another cowboy, this one 6 foot tall with a modest half-gallon hat, called us over and wanted to know if either one of us could drive. Of course, Eddie could drive. And he had a license, and I didn't. He had 2 cars with him, and he was driving back to Montana. His wife was sleeping at a Grand Island motel, and he wanted one of us to drive the cars there where she'd take over. At that point, he was going north, and that was to be the limit of our ride with him. But it was a good 200 miles into Nebraska, and of course we jumped for it. Eddie drove alone, the cowboy and myself following, and no sooner were we out of town than he started to bawl that jack 90 miles an hour out of sheer exuberance. "Damn me, what's that boy doing?" the cowboy shouted, and took off after him. It all began like a race. For a minute, I thought Eddie was trying to get away with the car, and for all I know, that's what he meant to do, but old cowboy stuck to him and caught up with him and tooted that horn. Eddie slowed down, and the cowboy tooted to stop. "Damn, boy, you're liable to get a flat going that speed. You can't drive a little bit slower, maybe?" "Well, I'll be damned. Was I really going 90? said Eddie. "I didn't realize it on this smooth road." "Just take it a little easy and we'll all get to Grand Island in one piece." "Sure thing." And we resumed our journey. Eddie had calmed down and probably even got sleepy, so we drove 200 miles across Nebraska, following the winding South Platte with its verdant fields. "During the Depression," said the cowboy to me, "I used to hop freights at least once a month. In those days, you'd see hundreds of men riding a flat car or in a box car, and they weren't just bums. They were all kinds of men, out of work and going from one place to another, and some of them just wandering. It was like that all over the West. Brakemen never bothered you in those days. I don't know about today. Nebraska, I ain't got no use for. Why, in the middle of the 1930s, this place wasn't nothing but a big fat dust cloud as far as the eye could see. You couldn't breathe. The ground was black. I was here in those days. They can give Nebraska back to the Indians as far as I'm concerned. I hate this damn place more than any place in the world. Montana's my home now. Missoula. You come up there sometime to see God's country." Later in the afternoon, I slept and I got some rest when he got tired of talking. He was an interesting talker. We stopped along the road for a rest and a bite to eat, and the cowboy went off to have a spare tire patched, and Eddie and I sat down in a kind of homemade diner. I heard a great laugh, the greatest laugh in the world, and here came this rawhide, old-timer Nebraska farmer with a bunch of other boys into the diner. You could hear his raspy voice. The cries clear across the plains, across the whole great world of them that day. Everybody else laughed with him. He didn't have a care in the world, and he had the hugest regard for everybody. Nevertheless, I said to myself, "Wham, listen to that man laugh. That's the West. Here I am in the West." He came booming down into the diner, calling Ma's name from a distance, and she made the sweetest cherry pie in Nebraska, and I had some with a mountainous scoop of ice cream on top. "Ma, rustle me up some grub before I have to start eating myself raw or some dilly damn silly idea like that." And he threw himself on a stool and went, "Yaw, yaw, yaw, yaw," and throw some beans in it. It was just the spirit of the West sitting right next to me. I wished I knew his whole raw life and what the hell he'd been doing all these years besides laughing and yelling like that. Ooh-wee, I told my soul. And the cowboy came back, and off we went to Grand Island. We got there in no time flat. We went to fetch his sleeping wife, and off to whatever fate awaited him in the intervening years since, and Eddie and I resumed on the road.